Hello everyone, thank you for joining us for the penultimate session of today's Design Talk programme. We're living in an age of changing retail, interiors, social, everything is in a state of flux. So we're going to be talking about spaces that are fit for multi-purpose. I won't do as good a job of introducing the speakers as they will themselves, so I will hand over to you guys to perhaps talk a little bit about yourselves and your work.
I've got the microphone here. Hi, my name is Leah Garrett. I'm a creative director and founder of Nous Design. We're interior designers for mainly hospitality, but we dab now and then into other commercial designs and residential. Company's running now for 10 years. Nice and nice to develop with that company and see it rising. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Kiri. I have a very small company called Fayre, and we usually focus on residential interior design, but we do a bit of commercial here and there. So, yeah.
Hi, I'm Tatjana von Steen from Sella Concert, and Gayle as well, so we're both from Sella Studio. We founded a studio nearly 4 years ago, mainly focused on commercial design, so hospitality, retail, set design, furniture design, branding, anything to do with design. So I lead on the interior design side.
And I lead on the branding side, so it's quite a nice mix because we tend to kind of design, we're led in like experience, and I tend to come in and weave through the brand, so it's a good mix.
Great, so before we delve in then, I'm wondering if beyond your own work, you can think of an example of a multi-purpose design-led space that you think works particularly well and why?
Might jump in. I think there's so many examples now, but I think the one that really flows quite well is in Milan in Corso Como, which it's kind of unapologetically all of the spaces it needs to be, but someone's really worked out the flow very, very well, and it doesn't feel so cumbersome to go from a very traditional dining experience straight into retail, then into like a gallery, and I just feel like they do it really, really well, and with a lot of flair, because I think, that's the challenge, to really, take that challenge on and create the spaces that flow together. So that would be my example.
I'm not sure if I'm very good at giving a specific one. I suppose the strength of a multi-purpose space is that there's an ongoing brand ethos and value that goes throughout. I think there's a lot of multi-spaces which have a retail store with a coffee shop, and it's upselling the coffee rather than actually telling a further story. I think in hospitality, I'd say hotels do it very well. I think particularly there's been a wave of US, American hotel brands who've come to the UK from the Ace Hotel, Standard, etc. And I think they've definitely reinvented the use of hotels in the UK, I think beyond the kind of old school ones, which is a daytime use from the workspace, lounge, hotel, restaurant, etc. So, but you always have a brand at the core of it. So you do sense that use of space throughout. So that's, I suppose, where my thinking goes straight away.
There are many examples. Obviously, hotels develop massively into we have an empty space, what are we going to do with it? We have a space that doesn't make enough money. And you can see the dynamic in that, which is really nice. There's a place I really like, just that comes to me in mind, in Croatia, which is in next to Zadar. And I visit it quite often, and every time I'll come in, there'll be another surprise. It used to be a regular coffee place, but then they realized that the woman upstairs left, so they started a small hotel, and that went well. And so what I liked about these guys is that they keep on developing as it goes along, and if it works, they'll just add something new. So they have a laundrette around the corner that's theirs as well, and they grabbed and kind of like made it into a multiple use space, but they're actually monitoring what's needed in the environment, and they take on board what they need, and they created a quite, it could seem messy, but quite a nice place to sit in when, if you needed another, there's a small library there, so you kind of like feel comfortable to stay. So like organic development is something I really liked about it.
There's a shop in Paris called Merci that again has the sort of cafe and a library, restaurant, shop for fashion, homewares, brilliant furniture, and it's just the kind of place that you could hang out all day, and it's kind of ever changing. So it's a really good example of a multi-purpose space, I think.
Do you think there's been a shift in culture that has pushed design in a more experiential direction?
Definitely. I think particularly in the retail industry, there's so many online sales, there's an up, salaries have gone up, rent's gone up, etc. And I think a lot of the brands are, at least from what we're experiencing in retail, a lot of the brands are looking as a brand point rather than a sales point only, which means that, it's really, so what is the brand experience? That's beyond the kind of selling XYZ. It's actually how you feel within it, what they press within it that will actually make you buy. I think that will make you sign up to the brand as a whole and the lifestyle that the brand kind of permits to it. So there is a flux. There's also, I think, a brand experience across all hospitality as well. I think people are just looking, everything is merging. Any of the designs we're coming across, I suppose retail people started coming to us even though we had a hospitality background because they're looking for a different experience. Hospitality wants to start adding retail, workspace wants to look like a home. It's all one big, industry. So it'll be interesting whether people then will want to start carving things out again because it all becomes too much of the same space. But I think like with everything, we'll just keep on moving into different cycles. But that's certainly the cycle we're in at the moment, which we love because it's really fun design.
I think we got to a stage where a lot of things are mixing up, and sometimes you have to recognize that you have to meet first of all the basics of the design that need to be there. So if it's a co-work space, it's first of all needs to meet the function. Now, I think a lot of the times you're looking, like you said, you're looking through like an Instagram picture, and then you come to the space and you expect some sort of a transparency through the brand to show you exactly what they are and how they do it. And some spaces are very good, or some designs are very good at doing that, and being consistent with their ethos and who's their target market and what they're expecting it to be. We find it harder in hospitality, especially in hotel design, because we are pretty much projecting forward a design that's going to be implemented in 3 years' time, 2 years' time. And you have to be that sincere with it, and you have to also allow time for it to develop and become current when it's floating out to the market, because the market is changing so much. You want to give yourself that flexibility of aiming it at the right place at the right time, and also being able to be flexible to change it as it goes along, So
I was going to say on that, I mean, while it's interesting, it's also a real challenge design-wise, I find, because more and more clients are going, so I really want this and I really want that, but I want it to be flexible too, and you're going, wait, what? It's not a white box. How do you create design with integrity without having to make everything on wheels? So it is a challenging point because clients want everything as well, don't they?
How do you then, almost moving on from that point, how do you create, as designers, a consistent DNA that will run through a project that has to deliver on so many different levels and fulfill so many different purposes?
Well, I think a lot of that would be sort of the materials that you're using within a space have a bit of a cohesive design in that sense. So whether things are sort of changing and moving within the different zones that you're moving throughout, if there's something, a nice element of material that's running through that binds it all together, I think that's what makes the transition feel quite comfortable, even though the spaces could be quite different.
We also find when we, at the start of every project that we do, we'll start off with a very a really, really early stage, which is to really get into the psyche of the brand. And if that's not there from our clients, we'll create that, and we'll create a piece of work around that. And it's great because it gives us, like a level playing ground for both Tatjana and I to work from. So you as a very look, feel concept of the space, how it flows. Me from a branding background, which really considers all of the same points, but in a different application. So it's quite nice to, then take two disciplines like interior and branding and apply. You're almost working from the same question, the design question. The solution is going to be slightly different, but it's going to be on track. And we quite like that. That almost that assurance that we're working off the same page. So I think, just weaving through the personality, and once you've defined that, then everything you do kind of, that rolls into everything.
We're just hopefully this year completing a project in Oslo, which was quite problematic because we had a client that had very high expectations of a commercial center that is that's a mixed use. It's quite a complex, with a mini spa, with an apartment on top, and we said, okay, we'll go back, we'll come back to you, and we realized that we wanted to take a story and put it forward and say this is what we think, and Norwegians have this wonderful relationship with nature, and so we took the idea of the Norwegian trees which are growing. And there's a story about the tree of life that grows through a building. And how is that kind of like developing in each area, if it's the roots, if it's the trunk, or if it's the foliage. And all of a sudden it clicked that the client, bought into it. They might not do, it's a risk. But once they did, it made, as you said, much easier to then go, right, that sets up the rules of the design. And this is what we're going to do.
See, we call them design pillars in our side. It's the only way we can get through, and we really define them as a design pillar coming off the brand DNA. That's the only way you can. And then, as you say, the materials can apply from day to night, whatever the room is specific. But you do need a centre point to hold on to, because otherwise, who knows?
So you touched upon materiality, but do you think it's always necessary to have a consistent aesthetic, or is it more actually about a consistent story that might not necessarily always be reflected in the design of a multi-purpose space?
I think it's the story, personally. I'd say it's the story. The design, it depends on the client. As in, my gut feeling is I want to walk somewhere and really feel, while it changes colours and materials, it's the same story. But, we have a kind of prospective client at the moment who wants to do a big hotel in Paris, and they want us to do the ground floor, retail, restaurant, and they want someone else to do the rooms. And we're like, what? And they're like, no, we specifically want a different feel. So, it took us a while to get our head around it, but I also understand it. His point is, no, I want it to be challenging. So I think everyone is trying to be progressive in their own way. Let's see how it goes. Because of the way we work and we go into the brand, etc., our way is far more of a fluidity throughout it. But I think, like everything with design, it's subjective. I think you just have to see it. Yeah.
So it's, you need to be able, in every project you do, I think, to be able to sum it up in two sentences. What is it about? And if you can't do it, then the client wouldn't understand it, and the person coming in wouldn't actually catch up to it. So it is very important to be clear and to be consistent. Consistency is really important. After you finish the entire design, you look back at these two sentences and say, right. Or what we do is we'll have 10 words that describe the feel of the space and what does it do. And so that's quite important. Keep that and come back to it.
And then moving into retail, it's quite a challenging landscape out there now for retail, which is almost been forced to move in a more experiential direction just because of the nature of how online shopping has affected that. Kiri, of course, you worked on Modern Society, which is a very pioneering concept store, and Sella Concept, of course, you guys have been at the forefront of maybe rethinking how we view traditional retail. So I'm wondering if you guys can talk about some of those projects and how you think you might have injected some innovation into the in-person retail experience.
Well, I worked on Modern Society, which opened in 2015, and that was a really great shop to work on because the client really wanted to push people away from digital. and sort of step back from all the algorithms that are telling you exactly what you've got to buy and what you want to buy. So she was really keen to create a space that would encourage you to take your time over your shopping experience. So you could come in, you could get a coffee, you could sit on some of the vintage furniture and flick through the books that were for sale. Nothing was sort of pushing you in any direction, forcing you around the shop. It was very much that you can linger and relax about it. And she really wanted to create a bit of a sensory experience that you would go home with a bit of inspiration, and just have really enjoyed and sort of remembered your shopping experience, unlike what you'd get if you sort of just piled into a high street store and, you know, whizzed around and then whipped back out again. So yeah, that was a really fun one.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have both sides. You know, one is the more sensory project. We actually met on a project called Clerkenwell London, I don't know, 8 years ago, 7 years ago, a long time ago, which we defined, designed, created, curated, etc., which was really amazing to work on, because, you know, we really took a big space which became a retail of independent small brands going into a vinyl lounge which exactly had the same, you know, ethos of slowness, into a restaurant, a wine tasting. So you just had this whole scenario happening in continuity. And I agree. I think that, you know, retail in the future at its best is sensory and calm, and is curated, really, because you have huge amount of choice online. The other side of it is we work quite a lot on kind of set design pieces. So when you're working with bigger brands, they'll be doing the occasional experiential marketing opportunities where you get to experience the brand in a kind of high, big flock space. But it's, you know, they do a kind of short-term 3 to 5 day or 1 day experiences, which I think is the more temporary solution. If you're not in a kind of a slowness of retail, I think you're creating brand experiences short term. And I think places, you know, people like Appear Here are really interesting. You know, they're creating solutions for retail or smaller brands to do a pop-up for a week, create a brand experience, get, you know, the sign-up from lots of people who then kind of have a continuous relationship with them online. So I suppose the world of retail will be pocketed in various ways, I think, in terms of permanent versus short-term retail spaces.
Yeah, it's also, I mean, just thinking about it, we don't do a lot of retail, maybe 1 or 2 a year, but it's really important to get people back on the high street. I mean, the high street is dying, so it's kind of like we need to be kind of like almost like brand ambassadors to get people back on, you know, to live in an environment, because it's, you know, if we don't do it, it's going to die out, and spaces that we have as community are going to be online community. I mean, that's it, you know, and maybe it ties back to the experiential design. So, you know, yes, you can experience it online, but it's going to become, it's a 2D experience.
But I think we had, over the last year, we worked with 2 really, you know, big retail brands, which was very exciting for us. And as always, it's always your best design. That doesn't happen, at least you think. But, you know, so we worked 6 months on both projects, on a huge flagship store in Tokyo, another amazing store in Covent Garden, for both really exciting brands, but both of them didn't go forward with the actual build because they suddenly kind of pushed back on having to invest on a retail platform. So we're definitely witnessing, you know, the risks of a retail industry firsthand. And I do agree the retail, you know, the high street's dying, but I think maybe it's not bad that the retail side is dying on the high street. I think there's probably an opportunity for the retail to transform, and I think they're doing a lot of really fascinating research on the moment that the retail, that the high street will have to be community-based and a social engagement-based more than shopping-based. So I think if brands, you know, who have the money can actually tap into creating something community-orientated or social-orientated and leave the sales up online, I think there might be a really interesting movement, because I think we can all do without an Oxford Street in this world.
And so beyond concept and almost drilling into the design of that, I guess if we're creating more experiential retail spaces, then it becomes more important than ever that the design really says something about the brand. I was in Marks and Spencer's recently, and they're doing a bit of a refresh, and I remember thinking it's just such a missed opportunity because they've gone for this almost nothing new brand that doesn't say anything. So how important actually is it now that design almost plays more of a role in communicating something about what the brand is and what their values are?
Well, I mean, for us doing a shop now in Notting Hill, where, I mean, the guys brought these beautiful CBD products, and
We just smoked it.
really,
Yeah, it sneezed with it.
oh my god, which one? The Westbourne Grove. Yeah. Thank you. So that was like
Sorry.
that was ours. But we had to go like, hold on a minute. I mean, how do we convey your brand? Or what do you say? You know, and we because it's called Molecule, and they really, I mean, the guy is, you know, like pioneering really what he thinks it should be and how the lifestyle of people are coming. We said, right, so you're gonna have a center of the shop will be the lab, and you'll have the guy that can actually, you know, like be standing there and prescribing you with what you actually need for your well-being, and that's how it kind of like started. And the materiality has to do with hemp materials. So yeah, it's kind of like staying with the consistency of that brand. So
it's interesting that you say that you had imagined, or your concept was that it would be maybe a central lab that would actually, like you say, you know, hand out a solution to what someone would want. Because I was walking around the store only a few days ago, and I thought, oh, this central piece is quite nice, but it was just for display now. So, I mean, it's a perfect example of a really strong concept that would have been amazing if somebody was manning that space, and then you walk in.
Absolutely.
The experience would have been completely different, but now it's just a plinth, essentially, you know.
they did open like 5 days ago, so
Yeah.
giving them a bit of slack.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful.
But yeah, they kind of like, you know, there is also the maturity of this. They have to get all the parts together, and it takes time. I think it's good. It's good to have that. They need to now, as we said, they need to mature into the environment and see how people respond, how they respond back, what's, you know, and come up with solutions that are really suitable.
But it's, you know, it's brave looking at the store you did as well. You know, it's brave because it's a huge space and not a lot of product. In comparison to what retail spaces used to walk in, you're going bam, 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 bombarded by endless of products. And, you know, now retailers are paring back, but equally the government's going to have to help them, you know, because the shops and restaurants, you know, the amount of restaurants we do, we're like so excited, and then it kind of closes down, you know, 2 years later. Because, so, you know, if the government doesn't help to keep us, the high street up and running, we can do all our part to create this lovely experiential, but in the end, you know, the operators are taking a huge risk for a huge amount of space, you know, which has far less sales per square foot in retail than would have been in the past, but far more experience. So I suppose they're hoping that the online sales follow afterwards. But it's a risky time.
And yeah,
but
that's a great
interesting
point
time.
about the
Very
about
risky times, yeah. I mean, also, that's why they need more acknowledgement, because we made sure that they had a coffee place in the back, because we said, you know, it's too big of a space. Let's say you'd be really successful, pare back on that, but you can develop that forward. So you can do that, and they have a yoga studio downstairs. So, but nobody knows because they need to put that outside. So it's a lot about retail is tricky in that way. You have to catch everybody's attention in like 3 seconds, you know.
And yet it's not just retail, even in the hospitality industry. It's, I'm assuming, wonderful when you get to work with a less risk-averse operator, but sometimes it's also a little bit of a concept half done, where they want to push the envelope but not too far, and in the end it doesn't really feel as if it delivers anything because of that slightly tepid way of approaching it. So to what degree do designers actually have a role or a responsibility to push the envelope in terms of how concepts are delivered, or to maybe encourage the operators to be less risk averse?
Do you want to say? Okay. I mean, we had a project that we've done for these guys, and they had a designer, and they said, oh, we want to get your opinion. I was like, well, you have a designer, so do you want to stick with them? And I said, well, look, you have to make a decision. Eventually they came back and said, we want you to design this space. And I was sometimes thinking about the client and thinking, poor guys, they really wanted us. So we developed a lounge that was an homage for a garden in a poem. And we put all these swings right in the middle of the lounge because it was part of the garden. And the owner could not get his head around the swings. He was like, why did you put in the middle of the lounge these red swings? I mean, this is so I was like, if anything, it will be your best Instagram moment, and you change it to sofas, 3 months later. But you have to give it that playful feel. People will be attracted to go in and try something else, and be part of that story that you're really trying to push. We're still working on that one, but eventually, it's going to come about. The swings. I said that I'm going to buy the swings. They can just install them. I'll take them home.
And then perhaps moving into residential, which I know is an area that you work heavily in, Kiri. Of course, how we go out and experience spaces is changing, but of course how we live is changing as well. I mean, as a freelancer, I work from home a lot. How my home has to function has evolved. So how do those shifts in lifestyle affect how you approach residential design?
Well, it's really, really key in residential design to look at each room, how exactly it's being used, how many purposes it has, and also, I guess, how it's used at the different stages throughout the day. I mean, the kitchen is like a prime example where it is no longer just about cooking and food preparation in the kitchen anymore. It's the heart of the home. You may have kids charging around in there, or homework being done, or, as you said, a lot of people are working from home, and that's actually, I haven't done a project in the last sort of 3-4 years that hasn't had a big emphasis on some kind of home office or a workspace of some kind. So yeah, it's really key, whether it's kind of about working out lighting and going back to the kitchen. For me, it's always now got to be in the biggest room of the house. So I was trying to encourage like the largest footprint, that's where the kitchen's got to be, so that it can have all those different functions. It's not just a single purpose room anymore. Likewise for the home office, it can't just be sort of shoved in the cupboard under the stairs anymore. It needs to have its own good space. It needs to have light. It needs to have greenery. It's all things that are sort of all about wellness and better for how we're reacting within the space. I mean, actually, you guys know a lot about this. You've done workspaces, haven't you?
Yeah, quite a few. We're in the workspace world right now, which we actually love, because again, it has so many multitudes of living uses and experiences within it. But I find it interesting because I think it's the same concept that the growth of the open plan living kitchen room is really the same concept in the house than it is the whole mix of views in all commercial spaces and the open kitchens and the chef's kitchens, etc. It's just, I suppose, everything feels more visible and merged somehow, doesn't it?
And what about spaces then, whether it's hotels or home or retail or any other form of hospitality, that they don't just have to fulfill a multiple purpose that is fixed, they also have to transition throughout the day. So how do you approach design from a transitional perspective as well, where actually a space can be the same space, but actually this might be something different in the afternoon or in the evening?
I mean, part of what we do is we do consultancy work for a few brands. We work with Marriott a lot, and in their new Sheraton there is a transition area, which is they call it the coffee bar, which is a horrible name, but it's a coffee bar in the day and it turns into a bar in the night, and if you're lucky it continues into the Vale bar, which is a cocktail bar, which is a bit putting a bit aside. So there is that idea, I think, for anybody that comes in, that you can find your own space. You can actually see how, as an individual, you come in and you'll have multiple options. It's either sitting arrangement, so you'll come in as an individual with a laptop and you just need 5 minutes before you go into a meeting. That's really important. Or you really want to lounge around and talk to your friends, and ideas of how a business meeting becomes more dynamic due to, simple, like the fact that the design can influence your environment in a way that you'll come out and say, oh, that was productive. I could hear them, Some places you can't hear yourself. So it's important to kind of be able to give solutions.
I think it's that human approach to space, because I can't stand it when I walk into a single use. You're not the same person every time you walk into your favorite restaurant. You're not the same person every time you walk into your office or your studio. And it's so important that you have those choices when you walk in as a customer visiting, that you choose. And we revel in these moments where we have, 6 different types of seating in little nooks and crannies or open plans, because it's a breath of fresh air these days to be able to not just walk into a restaurant with 45 seats and the same tables and the same chairs, and that choice makes the space feel considered, and it leaves a lasting impression, I think.
Do you argue between you? Oh, we should sit here now. We're going
No,
back.
we should. Yeah.
No, we're like,
yeah.
no.
Moving around the light. Yeah.
The same principles then, I guess, deployed in residential. Is it lighting?
I was going to say, with residential, I mean, I think it's the same, is that obviously, depending on the space, because in a city, space is a premium, so it can be a bit difficult at times. But I personally would rather have a room that would offer all those different things. So let's say in the kitchen, throw a table lamp on a work surface and that's there, and it just means that already you come in and you don't read it as single purpose. It's more of a living space within a kitchen, rather than trying to be really, really clever about storage solutions. A table that flips up and clips onto the wall. I find all that a bit contrived. It's about having the options, even if it's a small space. You can still apply all those different elements in an interesting way, rather than thinking you can sort of tuck things here, there, and there.
And then last question from me, and then we'll throw it out to the audience, see if anyone has anything that they would like to ask. But this shifting lifestyle towards multi-purpose spaces, do you think that is something that's inherently our culture, kind of Western European culture, or is it actually something that we're seeing in a global capacity?
Say in developed countries, developed cities, I'd say, I think when you're walking down wonderful, more old European cities, you still have the little cafe, the restaurant, the thing, but they also have a different, slightly less sterile culture anyway. You go into Portugal and you go in a little cafe, the chairs are all on top of each other, suddenly it's a bar, everyone's eating it, so it's already a little bit more relaxed anyway in terms of its use, and I think, which is really wonderful, and I think we're probably all trying to recreate that within a system that allows it, I suppose.
Well, my partner is Portuguese, so I understand that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, they probably don't have a 1 meter kind of corridor rule between everything. But equally, it depends, I think. I think we're all still talking about the people who are quite progressive in their thinking. Yes, you have a lot of stores who are putting a coffee counter, but I don't consider those concept stores. I think they have a coffee counter. I think in restaurants, we've definitely come across people, we definitely do push them a lot. And we get, probably because we get bored of the same design, so we're going, okay, right, and you're going to go steps up here and this and that. Some people are going, I love it. Everyone else is going, why would I have a sunken booth? And why would I put steps up? Because operationally that doesn't fit. So, you revert back to 7 tables in the middle. So it is, people are also pushing against it. I think we're at the forefront of trying to push actually that multi-experience as designer, and I think there are a lot of people who are biting at it, and there's some people who are doing it amazingly, and a lot of people are doing it half-heartedly, as you said. So there's still a lot of room to do really amazing stuff.
Yeah, I think it's really important to also remember what's your location, where you're, and take the essence from actually what they're doing, what you're doing in a specific space, and being able for that to flourish with your experience from other spaces. So we're doing now a hotel in Thailand, Phuket, which is a really nice thing to do, but the architect comes with a very different understanding of footprint of spaces. But at the same time, he talks about the natural ventilation of a building, which we completely lost in cities. And actually is hugely important, whether we can, bring that back into a London environment. It would be amazing if you could, in a really hot climate, being able to naturally ventilate a building. So it's kind of like, I think it's taking the best, but keeping local and making sure that you are able to, both influence and give an input and then listen a lot to what's needed. Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions that they would like to ask the panel? If not, then a very quick plug. We're going to be back here in just under an hour with Oliver Heath, who will be discussing biophilic design. But in the meantime, if you can join me in saying thank you to Tatjana, Gayle, Kiri and Nous. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.